Hi there, beer nerds. I hope y'all are having a great week. This past week, there was an editorial in the New York Times by Jim Koch, who is the founder of Boston Beer Company. And with a title like, "Is This the Last Call for Craft Beer?" We know that there's probably some good pessimism in this article, and you know it was going to cause a crazy uproar in the beer community. So I want to know, just after you heard this title or maybe even read the article, but do you think that this is craft beer's last call? Do you think craft beer is starting to trend towards I don't want to say death, but less significance? I want to know what you think. So after you watch this video, let me know what you think in the comments below. But I just want to kind of go through this New York Times editorial kind of point by point. And I want to challenge these opinions a little bit that Jim Koch has, because I'm not sure they really hold up once you start to really think them all the way through a little bit. So in this article, which I'll throw a link to in the description below as well, but in this article, Jim Koch starts giving stats, and stats I'm going to ask you to remember for later because they're pretty important. So he starts out by setting the stage that in 1981, the U.S. just had 82 breweries, and the beer was what he called the laughingstock of the beer world, which was mostly true at the time, from what I'm told. But today, the United States has over 5,300 breweries, and probably one of the most innovative brewing scenes out there in the world. So just remember those numbers, going from 82 breweries to 5,300 breweries. That's going to be important. So, he starts by giving credit to the industry for its growth, and then he kind of dives into his main areas of criticism that he thinks will be the last call for craft beer. So he mentions the 2008 merger of Molson Coors and SAB Miller, which he says essentially created a duopoly of Miller Coors and AB InBev, who at the time controlled 90% of the beer produced in the United States. He cites that almost immediately there was a 6% increase in beer prices, and drinkers paid a whopping $2 billion more for their beer after everything was said and done. Now, this first stat he gives, I think, is kind of misleading. Remember when he said in 1981 there were only 82 breweries, and if all things stayed the same between 1981 and 2008, we might be able to compare all of these situations being the same market forces, and say, oh look, this merger happened and then prices went up, so it must be the cause of the merger. But in 2008, if you look at the American Brewers Association and their numbers, the U.S. had over 1,500 breweries. And guess what? Craft beer tends to be a little bit pricier than Bud and Miller. So you might say that this new duopoly raised their prices at the same, in that moment in 2008. But at the same time, consumers were already in the process of switching to the more expensive craft beer. So maybe that 6% increase wasn't all due to this crazy, scary duopoly that Jim Koch cites. Maybe it was due to shifting consumer preferences as well. And so, that's kind of the thing, is to kind of reduce everything down to this one merger causing all of these beer price increases. Really just ignores all the progress that craft beer was making during the time. And then he kind of goes on and says, this duopoly caused a consolidation of distributors too. We went from 4,600 distributors in 1980 down to under 3,000 today, here in 2016, 2017. But again, to blame it all on the duopoly, or now monopoly with AB InBev, is kind of absurd. We went from 82 breweries in 1981 to 5,300 today in 2017. And probably the most dramatic shift is how people buy their beer today. Where do people buy beer from these new breweries? Tap rooms, of course. Places distributors get cut off from. They don't get a part of that business. So business is moving away from the classic middleman distribution model because tap rooms are gaining a bigger and bigger share of the actual consumption market, and that's a direct distribution model. So of course we would see distributors start to fail because tap rooms are taken over. That's where I drink most of my craft beer, straight out of the brewer's tap room. Love the fresh local flavor. And I'm sure even Boston Beer Company has a tap room, and it's probably more popular than it's ever been. So it really seems like a major insight by Jim Koch to kind of blame, these two big brewers, now one gargantuan brewer, for the death of all the distributors, when all these other breweries that exploded onto the scene do most of their distribution directly. So that just seems like a major kind of oversight in his whole argument here. Excuse me, gotta get some more of my delicious homebrew, Koch Stout, good stuff. Which is kind of another point too, homebrewing has also exploded, but that is probably safe for another video. So then Jim talks about how the US government allowed Miller Coors and AB InBev to finally merge, and how they didn't make them sell a lot of their holdings like he thought the antitrust laws should make them. Apparently some other countries made them sell off some big manufacturers. I know China made Miller sell off a big chunk of whatever Chinese brand that they owned. But this might be some fair criticism depending on how you feel about antitrust laws. But I'm sure Jim Koch, being a direct competitor of AB InBev, has read their annual report, which I cited in my last video actually, where I poked some sarcastic fun at AB InBev. But in that report, you will find that they are actually kind of struggling in the US market right now. They're still losing share, even though they're acquiring craft brewers, and their overall earnings per share has been down ever since their merger. So as far as, a business impact being felt, AB InBev is still feeling the pressure from the craft beer revolution that's been going on. And then finally, Jim Koch kind of takes a shot at AB InBev and the brewers they acquired. I'm going to quote him directly now because I think this language is pretty important. Drinkers are buying cute-sounding brands like Goose Island or Terrapin or 10 Barrel, and are often unaware that these brands, some of them once independent, are now just subsidiaries. End quote. Wow, way to kind of talk down to beer customers. If you watched that video I made last week poking fun at AB InBev's acquisition of Shock Top and how they are now kind of looking to restore the brand's image because drinkers are realizing that it's kind of fake craft beer. These acquisitions don't always go super smoothly, mostly because now we have a whole new breed of beer consumer that is smart enough and bothers to do research on where their beer comes from and who brews it and what the story behind the beer is. And so while yes, I'm sure a lot of consumers out there are a little bit fooled sometimes by these brands being able to hide the AB InBev mega conglomerate behind them. But seriously, there's a lot of smart beer drinkers out there. We're all looking into it and doing research and learning about hops and things like that. Don't talk down to the consumers like that. And just overall, he gives these examples and industry trends from about the early 80s all the way up today. So about 3 decades worth of criticisms he packs into this kind of little editorial. But at the same time, we went from 82 breweries to 5,300 breweries in that same 3-decade span, and all these terrible things he says is killing craft beer happen. And so I don't understand how he can, at the same time, think that there's all these market forces stacked against craft beer, while craft beer has never grown stronger. Now, sure, we're probably not going to keep seeing years of double-digit growth. Those days are probably over. It's a maturing market now. That's just the way it's going to be. And sure, the beer industry is going to get a little bit more unforgiving as we go forward, and we're going to see some more brewery closures as consumers kind of get a little more selective because the selection today is really just ridiculous. But craft beer is here to stay. This isn't craft beer's last call. We're just starting the after party here. It's going to be a very profitable business for a long time, especially as people continue to look towards more local sources for not just their beer, but their food as well. I think this trend is here to stay. I think local brewing is here to stay. But to kind of extend some sympathy to Jim Koch, I kind of see what he's feeling. You know, a lot of us are focused on kind of these hyper local breweries, their cool stories, connecting with the brewers who are active in the community, and it's really great. But it's hard for a big regional, or I suppose Sam Adams is a national brand that's not a part of this conglomerate, to really get a lot of traction these days, especially when, you know, AB InBev clearly has some advantages that he pointed out very well in this article. But, you know, at the same time, extending his problems of not having the same advantages of AB InBev doesn't mean, and he also doesn't kind of have the hyper local connection that a lot of these small breweries have. He's kind of in this amorphous middle ground where it's tough to get drinkers to keep buying your product over and over again, with these guys trying to head you off at the distributor and the little guys just expanding exponentially the amount of choice that drinkers have out there. It's hard to keep your consumer base loyal. And so I get where he's coming from. He's in a really difficult spot. But to take all these criticisms he has of how the US government handled these mergers and extend it to all of craft beer just really doesn't make sense. Jim, I'm sorry, you're not craft anymore. Just because you're having a bit of a struggle, and a very understandable struggle, doesn't mean the whole industry is struggling too. So as a child of the beer revolution, because I'm a young guy, I didn't grow up when all this was happening. I came in during the big exponential spike in this whole thing. I don't believe this is the last call for craft beer. I think it's going to be around here for a while. But I want to know how you would respond to this article. I've got a link to it in the description below. Also, please tell me in the comments below what you think of this article. Do you think craft beer is going to start contracting? Do you think it's going to grow more slowly? That's kind of where I lean. Or do you think Jim's kind of out there and crazy, and craft beer is going to keep this rocket ride's going to keep going up? Let me know in the comments below. Also, be sure to check back on Friday. We'll have a brand new episode of Beer by the Numbers for you then. Cheers, beer nerds.